Welcome to Seafood Matters Podcast, a voice for the seafood industry. And with over 60 years hands-on experience, I'm your host, Jim Cowie. Hi Andy, welcome to Seafood Matters Podcast. I'm delighted to interview Andy Reid. Hi Andy, from the Fishing News. Can you tell us about yourself, where you've come from and how you've reached where you are with the Fishing News, Andy?
Well, I joined Fishing News a year ago as editor, although I'd written columns and articles going back to, I think, 1993. The first one I ever wrote, I wrote in pencil in my diary, coming in to land prawns on a Friday night in Oban when I was fishing. So I was a working fisherman for 8 years. I started as a decky in the Isle of Man on the scallops, ended up prawn creeling out of Oban for a few years. I was never the best fisherman in the world. And anyone in Oban will tell you that. I made a living, but I was a plodder. And I was always outfished by those people that have got that special spark. You know, they always seem to just know what to do with their gear better than I did. I went to Aberdeen after a few years to Aberdeen Uni as a mature student and studied fisheries science. And after that, I worked in the industry in the PO. And then eventually I went over to the Isle of Man to work for the government on the industry there. So I came to Fishing News more by accident than anything else, but I'm enjoying it.
I think you're being a wee bit unkind to yourself.
Well, ask the boys in Oban and they'll tell you I was a plodder.
So is your background in fishing?
I'm not from a fishing family, but I originally went out just to help a friend who was a scientist on a boat in the Isle of Man for a day. Fell in love with fishing, and that's all I've done ever since. So I started then when I was 21. I phoned my mum up and said, "I'm not coming home. I'm going to be a fisherman." She was horrified, and then that's all I've ever done since.
Well, it doesn't sound as if it's been as bad for you as you're making out.
Oh, I love it, and I'm really enjoying the time at Fishing News. Fishing is getting a bad press everywhere. The noose is tightening, and it's defending an industry that I love is something that I really want to do.
Yeah, it's certainly tightening, and it's quite concerning. And I think possibly, would you agree, more so in Scotland than possibly even England?
I'm not sure I'd agree with that, Jim, because the one thing Scotland's got that a lot of England hasn't got is fish. There's a real crisis on the East Coast and the southern North Sea where there simply isn't the fish to catch. And although the political winds might be blowing in the wrong direction, ultimately, if there are fish in the sea, there'll be fishermen. And if the fish aren't there, you can't make a living.
Yeah.
And Scotland is blessed with most places is still blessed with healthy fish stocks that are doing well, and as long as they're there, there'll be a future of some sort.
Yeah, the problems that we find in Scotland, although there is fish, it's on one breath, it's trying to get certain scientists, to actually accept that there is the amount of fish. And others, they are basing it on flawed science. And the regulations are just almost beggars belief, how they expect fishermen to survive and make a living.
Yes, but the industry is making huge steps to improve that science, and I would say, I mean, I'm back from Shetland recently, and I fully understand the frustrations Shetland fishermen are getting when an under 10 vessel can catch his monthly allocation in one day, because the fish are there and the quota isn't. But in the long term, that's probably less of a problem than a fisherman in Lowestoft or Yarmouth who's got plenty of quota, who simply can't, who loses money every time they go to sea because there's nothing to catch.
Yeah.
That might not be an answer you'd like to hear, and if you're in Scotland and you're being stopped from making a living by rules, I can understand the frustration. But I still have an optimism for the long term future that might not be there elsewhere in the British Isles.
Oh, don't get me wrong, Andy. There's plenty of our fishermen who are optimistic and have to be glass half full rather than half empty, and they've proved that by making massive investments, financial investments, and their families, millions of pounds of investment in new boats, and their fathers down the generation, sons on board and grandsons. So I'm certainly a positive outlook with a lot of them, but they do fear the future.
Absolutely, and jam tomorrow is no good when you've got to pay this week's expenses. I understand that.
That's right. That's right. Going forward and the fishing news, where do you see where the fishing news has come from?
Well, I mean, I'm standing. That's that phrase about standing on the shoulders of giants. I mean, I'm inheriting a wonderful publication that has done a great job over the years. I can't think I'll never ever be able to fill Dave Linky's shoes and operate the way Dave did. His memory, his understanding of the boats and the Northeast particular, is something that I simply won't have. He came to the Isle of Man a few years ago and was pointing at boats that I'd known for 20 years and he'd seen twice and saying, "Is that a new wheelhouse on the Frey?" And I was like, "How did you know? How did you remember that?" And he was like, "Well, it's a boat. I remember these things." I'll never ever be able to follow Dave Linky in that way. In terms of fishing news itself, we're obviously under pressure in terms of the world is changing, everything's going online. I think where as a paper we can still make our mark is by an analysis and looking at things in depth that isn't covered in the same way on a tweet or a quick online article.
Yeah, I would say you're being a bit unkind again. As far as David is concerned, I totally accept and agree with everything you said. I mean, the man was just amazing. A number of times he was up in Scrabster here, and one of the things that got me one time, it might have been the new boy Andro, but I'm not sure. But it was a new boat, just commissioned and starting to fish, and he hadn't got photos of it for his feature in the paper. So he came up and he was so passionate about and so professional, and he didn't like taking a photo of a boat when it was tied to the pier. So he took a small boat, hired a small boat, and had the fishing boat he was going to film and photograph out in the bay. And he was out in this small boat, and it was a horrid day of really bad weather. And here's him bobbing up and down round
Yeah.
the bay to get action shots of the boat that he wanted. It was just incredible. And on another occasion, I wanted to get photographs of remember the Ashvale fish and chip shops in Aberdeenshire. I'm very friendly with the managing director, Stuart, and it was the 30th birthday, and I used to remember going into the Ashvale when I was younger, when I was doing with fish lorries and courting my now wife was a nurse in Aberdeen and that. So I was in Aberdeen a lot, and I used to always love going to the Aberdeen for the Ashvale for fish and chips. and I loved all the all the paintings and photographs and that of all the active fishing boats. And as I was going laterally, it was just showing it's dated, and obviously Aberdeen isn't a fishing port, designated port any longer. So I thought, it's just needing a wee bit updated. So I spoke to one or two fishermen, Peter Bruce and Peter Head, Davy Milne, Faithly, Alan Addison, Venture, and then Tom Harkis, Peter and Ian Harkis and Orkney, and just different people around asking, look, let's get photos of your boats and we'll gather them together and present them to the Ashvale for his 30th birthday. So, and Andrew Bremner was involved. He was in it as well. So they're like, no, let's get a hold of David Linke. So honestly, Andy, David sent me a DVD with over 100 photos of absolutely stunning boats from all over Scotland, and new and old and action shots and stunning shots. So
thank you, Jim, for reminding me that I can't take pictures like Dave.
But so we no, that's not the point. So we went along. There was a group of us, about 10 or 12 fishermen. There's different fishermen involved, and myself, and we went along to the Ashvale and presented Stuart Devine, by the way. Presented Stuart with us, and he's now got them. He's got a DVD made with a wee video, and it's ongoing, showing on the wall. And he's also got stills of all the boats round as well. So he was just involved in so many different ways.
Absolutely, and that's a great way of making the point that so many people who eat fish don't make the connection with the work involved in putting it in front of them. Having those pictures up is a really good way of making that point.
Yeah, definitely. How do you feel the fishing news? It's really well integrated into the fishing anyway, isn't? Do you feel that?
It is. I have to remember. We call ourselves the voice of the industry, and that's. It's a very hard thing to say because there is more than one voice. You get 3 fishermen in a room, you've got 3 opinions very often. But it has to be driven by the fishermen themselves, and we're entirely reliant as a newspaper on input from the industry. We, rather than telling the industry what's good for it, we need to hear from the industry and get that view out. Something that I like to emphasize is the power that we punch above our weight. So about 20% of our readers are not fishermen. They're civil servants, they're fisheries managers, they're consultants, they're NGOs. And we're the only real medium to get the industry's message in front of those people and get them to listen. Quite often, if we put a story in that one or other ministers don't like, we'll get a phone call 2 days later from the minister's assistant saying, could you have reported that differently? Can I have the right of reply? And we are, in a way, getting a message to them directly that I don't think any other medium's got.
Yeah, well, that's really very interesting because I think it's something possibly the industry could use.
Absolutely, and we are only as good as the industry voices, if you like, that we report. So we are utterly dependent ultimately on the industry talking to us and using us to get their message across.
Well, hopefully we can use this edition of our podcast to help get that message across.
Absolutely.
But it's been there's been an integration going back for many years, And I often think, when a boat was for sale, if a fisherman, whether he was retiring or had enough or whatever, it's the fishing news that went in for sale. And even to the point where quite often I would be speaking to a skipper when he had finished his trip. If it wasn't a very good trip and he didn't make very much money, jokingly, obviously, he would be saying, "Oh, if I'll no pick up shortly," he says, mean the boat. It's a fishing news. Back of the fishing news, it'll be in.
Yes, yes. And yeah, I think that's something we need to look at because obviously most of that's online now. It's easier. But no, yes, going in the back of fishing news was always a sort of threat about walking away from the industry, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And it was just a recognised place where boats were put up for sale, and anybody looking for a boat, it's fishing news. He would look to see what was for what was.
Absolutely. And on top of that, it was also a very good barometer about which part of the UK was doing well and which part was doing badly. Because you could, sometimes the southwest was doing well, or the northeast of Scotland, or the west coast of Scotland, and you'd get a feel from looking at the ads in fishing news about which parts of the industry were healthy and which were suffering.
Yeah, I think you help out with some other podcasts and things like that as well, don't you?
No, we're meant to be getting involved and supporting a couple of other podcasts run through the industry, but we haven't yet. It's something possibly we ought to look at. We're relaunching Fishing News next year. We're moving up by a couple of pages. We're getting more and more copy in at the moment. It's quite a good time, and we're often having to miss a story or two out each week. So we're going to go slightly larger, probably in February.
That's interesting. Well, it's good to hear that that's the way you're thinking, increasing rather than cutbacks and cutting back. And
I think it's a reflection partly of how active the industry is, whereas I think more and more people are aware that there's an audience out there that needs to see what's happening, as it were, rather than inward looking, in order to protect the industry going forward. We've got a very good message to sell. It's that 20% of the readership that a lot of those people are making the decisions about the industry. And getting our message across about the fact that every year less seabed is trawled because fishermen are becoming more efficient. The number of boats is going down. Whatever the doom and gloom is, overall, that in spite of changing climate, the health of the sea is getting better.
That's right.
And the more we can get that message across, the better. We're also running a bit more science in fishing news now. You might have noticed. Just quick summaries of things like an Irish paper that came out recently documenting common skate. Now, common skate are becoming more common, and no one fishes for skate deliberately. But the fact that a large, slow-growing, long-lived species is growing its range again is a reflection that fishing effort overall is going down, and that overall the ecosystems are better. And that's the kind of message we should be getting across. And I'm trying to make more and more effort in fishing news with help from the industry to get that in print so people can read it.
Yeah. I had a podcast. In fact, it's the first 2 editions of this Seafood Matters podcast that I'm doing is with a fishery scientist in Iceland, Jon Christensen, and he's been involved in stock assessments and things for tens of years. And as he says, that if it's not fished, I'm just wondering, when you mentioned the southern North Sea, if it's actually the fact that its problems is it's not hard enough fished.
I honestly don't know, but when you look at, certainly the Southern Channel, the amount of effort from the combined fleets, the big fly shooters, the Belgian beamers, it's hammered. But and I certainly I've been out. I did a couple of features on small boats working from the south coast of England, and it was heartbreaking seeing how little is out there. It was so good for me getting back up to Scotland and walking around the market. And you don't need to be a fishery scientist when you're seeing 4 fish per box. You know the stock's healthy.
You hear, I mean, even what one of the problems we have in Scotland, as you're saying there, with we have fish. I mean, our scientists, well, ICES are realised now, and they're reporting that the stocks are as healthy as they have been for many a years. But the NGOs and people like that, they're trying to ban cod fishing, and our fishermen are saying things like they're actually getting cod in their creels, and they've never ever seen that ever before. And that's not just maybe north here, that's from the Solway right up the west coast, round Shetland, and down to the Tweed and the east coast. They're actually getting cod in their creels.
It's very, very difficult because it's inarguable that certain cod stocks are in real trouble. You know, they're abundant in some places, and other places they're not. And again, there used to be a real problem with Area 7 beta K cod, we called it, channel cod. The quota was never enough. Fishermen were always having to discard or worry about what they were doing with the fish. That the quota uptake this year is 10%. You know, it is. I mean, I think we had an article in Fishing News called "A Tale of Two Cod." That there's a mixed story, and the NGOs are cherry picking the bad news stories and extrapolating those to areas where there's a lot of local abundance. It's very, very difficult. And I think that there's a political argument too. For instance, the cod in the north are doing very, very well. There's a risk that if that was a separate stock assessment and a separate quota, countries like Norway would say, right, we want more, we want a bigger share, like they have with the mackerel and the herring and the blue whiting. So it does become very difficult. I think where the industry should stand up and be proud of itself is in a generation we've moved from fearing science, if you like, to providing the data, volunteering the data, cooperating as much as possible to get the data there so that the stock assessment reflects what fishermen are seeing on the grounds. And we seem to almost flipped in Scotland, where a generation ago the scientists were chasing the fishermen for data and couldn't get it. Now the fishermen are chasing the scientists, and the scientists in Marine Scotland certainly are very, very hard to get hold of or pin down.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. One thing when we're talking about integration and going back, your points about never filling David Linky's shoes and copying him, I don't think it's a need for that. I think you've got enough. I think it's what you're doing for the Fishing News is different. Not a case of copying somebody or filling. You're doing what you're good at and what you're passionate at.
Yes. Yes, and I'm not. Yeah, and I can't take photographs. So I do apologise to everybody for that. You could charter me a boat to send me out into Scrabster Harbour. I'd drop the camera in the sea, or something would happen, but the photographs wouldn't be there anyway.
Well, here's a point then. Is there anything you'd like to say on here about to see if we can drum up a bit of interest and get? Because one thing I notice, you'll see yourself on social media, fishermen are always putting photos on social media of either their boat or some scenes when they're fishing. Would you like to get some of that sent to Fishing News?
We'd love to, and I've already bothered a few people for shots of cod. You know, there's a few Scottish skippers who will know they've suddenly had texts saying, "Can you send me a picture of this, please, or that, please?" It's great. There are a whole bunch of people who are already submitting photographs to us, really high quality, particularly for some reason Scotland and Northern Ireland. But anyone who would like to to submit more. We'd love to see them, and not just boats themselves, but actually sort of life on board. The cod end coming in. Those kind of shots, because we're always looking for pictures that illustrate stories, and the power of those pictures to illustrate a story is really strong and get a message across. So we'd love to see some more.
Well, keep it going, because we'll be putting it out, Andy.
Okay, that would be great. And we've increased the prize. We have readers' picks once a month, and we've introduced sort of bigger prizes for those. Every month we've got John Goodlad's excellent book, Salt Roads, for the best pick of the month. But we like seeing them, and we also like the story behind the picture, if that makes sense. So if people are sending a pick in, if they can say, and we were off wherever because we had to go fishing for monk that month because we had no cod quota, that little bit of extra information also makes the pictures much more interesting.
Yeah, and of course, the modern smartphones, the cameras are as good as any digital camera you'll get.
Absolutely. And given the communications these days, you can get it almost, even if you're 100 miles offshore, it can be flying through the air, through the ether, in real time almost.
Yeah, no, we must get this across and get them, because if it's as easy to send it to Fishing News as post it on Facebook.
Absolutely, and especially if, again, a message behind it, not just we were here, but we're here because of X or because of Y or the following things were happening. It's interesting. It adds context to the pictures, and it tells a story.
Definitely. And where do you see the Fishing News going forward, Andy?
Well, we're going to be slightly larger, a couple of pages bigger next year. I'd like us to have more local coverage than we're currently having. Again, that's down to readers. I was lucky enough to go back over to Kelsey headquarters, where the Fishing News back to 1901 are kept, 1913, sorry. And it's very much almost like it's who's talking to who and who's met who. And I think I'd like a bit more of that kind of input, for which we're entirely reliant on the readers. Because we are a community, and the more we can sort of reflect that in the pages of Fishing News, I think the better.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, obviously, before, when I was younger, before social media and internet, you would just be really looking forward to the next edition of the Fishing News to see. That was the days when the big trawlers fishing out to Hull, Grimsby, Fleetwood, and that. And you would looking forward to seeing who broke the record and of the catches, and that. It was all in Fishing News.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't report on individual boats any longer. I don't think I don't think that would go down so well these days. And I think some of that's confidential, isn't it? Even though you can see on the market prices. But I think we will be looking at more in-depth features as well, because in a day of instant everything, it's something that you can read more at leisure, especially when you're at sea or you're steaming home. There's still a future for the printed page for that kind of article in a way that there isn't for more instant news.
Yeah. I mean, there was a time here, Andrew Bremner, his dad, Norrie, he used to be up a lot when it was just when Andrew started going to sea and Norrie came ashore. He'd be up for any boats coming into land. He'd be up in Scrabster. He would always take daily papers and a copy of the Fishing News. And every boat that would sail out to Scrabster would sail with a copy of the papers and a copy of the Fishing News. And when he eventually passed away, I kind of felt that's my responsibility now to pick up the cudgels, and for long years and years after, until I've recently sort of retired from my business, I kept that going, and I made sure that no boat left Scrabster without a copy of the Fishing News and the daily
That's
papers.
great. That's great to hear. We did some some quick analysis when I first joined, and in fact, we have 5.5 readers for every paper copy, because what tends to happen is, it's put on board the boat and then it's passed around the crew, or it's put in the sales office and it's passed around. And 5.5 per copy is very, very high compared to most publications.
Yeah, and I used to always feel that given that, if I was to, maybe copy the Fishing News and the main broadsheets papers, maybe you would be talking £5-6. And I used to think, well, if I handed a fisherman a £5 note, they're going to almost be insulted, saying, why do you think you need to give me that? But giving them the Fishing News, oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, indeed. Well, long may that continue.
It still has an integration into the industry, Andy, I can assure you that.
That's great to hear.
Well, Andy, it was really fantastic speaking to you, and I think from what you're saying and what you've said for us, I think we can say that long live the Fishing News, and it's still in good hands, and I'm sure it'll have a great future.
That's great, Jim, and thanks for it. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. And really, we're in the hands of the readers and the industry. As long as it's an industry, we'll be here for them.
Well, that's a good way of putting it, because it's more or less saying, well, it's up to us, each person in the industry, to keep the Fishing News up there.
Absolutely, and get that voice out there, and get those people who are reading us, who make those decisions, to listen to what we're saying.
Yeah. No, quite often I see photographs, fishermen saying fishing deluxe, and they'll have a photograph of the most stunning sky, sunset or sunrise. So we'll have to tell them to get it on the Fishing News.
It is indeed, and yeah, so many bits of our jobs which are wonderful that that no other industry has.
Yeah. Well, I certainly detect a passion there, Andy, and I'm sure David will be happy up there that he knows that it's still in good shape and in good hands.
Well, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Andy. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Seafood Matters podcast. You can get in touch and listen to all the other episodes on my website, seafoodmatterspodcast.com.